Welcome and thank you for joining today's call, Regional Issues Forum. Note that all audio connections are muted at this time to reduce background noise until the Q&A portion of the call. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Pam Sporberg, Regional Issues Forum Chair. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to our second virtual EIM Regional Issues Forum. There are a couple of changes to the format. I think you've noticed that we're having a shorter forum, but that also means that we will be having more frequent forums. We're evaluating each Governance Review Committee meeting and governing body meeting to see if there's an opportunity to also include a shorter Regional Issues Forum update in association with each of those meetings. So hopefully we'll have this more adapted format for the WebEx. We've also enabled video conferencing for our presenters and the same Q&A format that we've had in the past with the opportunity to ask questions via #2. Before we go to our agenda for today, I want to take a roll call from the RIF liaisons. Liaisons, can you press #2 and then identify yourselves and your sector once the operator unmutes your line? And can we start with Matt? Because I think
yes,
you are
Matt LaCar. Yes, Matt LaCar, Pacific Gas and Electric, representing the California Transmission Owners sector.
Cheryl Murray. I'm the liaison for the Consumer Advocate Group, and I'm with the Office of Consumer Services in Utah.
Hi there, Erin Kester, representing Avangrid Renewables, liaison for the IPP and power marketer sector.
And hi, this is Cameron Yurkowski. I'm with EDP Renewables. I'm the other liaison for the IPP and marketers sector.
Tony Braun, liaison for the publicly owned utility sector.
Hi, this is Suzanne Cooper with Bonneville Power Administration with the Neighboring Adjacent Balancing Authority sector.
Remind us too, if you're a liaison, you need to identify yourself.
Grace, I see you on the attendee list. I think you're our last one.
I'm sure your device is unmuted as well.
Well, I think that provides us with quorum today. This is Pam Sporberg with Portland General Electric, representing the transmission and utility sector. Our first agenda topic today is a panel on the future of natural gas, and then we'll be followed by a panel on our new EIM entrants and their process and lessons learned from going live in the EIM. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt LaCar to introduce our first panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. So appreciate the opportunity to facilitate this discussion. We have an excellent panel of leading thinkers on this topic. So I'll just introduce it by saying we actually have an active proceeding or investigation in California on this topic. I think I proposed the panel topic before even that was started. So, it's something that's on a lot of folks' minds as we move towards greater renewable penetration throughout the West, that the use of natural gas is changing, and the role of gas-fired generation on the electric side, has certainly seen some changes. That raises longer-term questions as we see gas dispatched less frequently for shorter run times, often to cover ramping needs or weather-driven contingency needs on the electric system, that reduces the amount of throughput and revenue that the gas pipeline operators receive, that gas local distribution companies receive to fund their investments in maintaining the system. So that's kind of the background, and I'll step back and let our panelists kick it off. So our first speakers are from E3 Consulting. We're going to start with Ren Orens, who's one of the founders of E3 and a managing partner there. And then his colleague Dan Oss is going to dive into some of the details around the gas system. So Ren, take us in with the big picture.
Thanks, Matt. Are we going to bring up the slides, or are we going to
believe
the agenda?
Yeah, I believe that will be done for us. Is that right, folks? So this is the E3 presentation we want to queue up now.
This is Pam. In just a moment, I think Mickey is bringing up the slides.
Great, thank you.
I can start, Matt, anyway. I've been in this business doing the kind of work we've been doing for 30 years. And I can say kind of over my career, and Matt, you brought it up in our initial discussion of this, I've gotten a lot of the questions really shouldn't be answered by consultants, really should be answered by policymakers. And one of the reasons we get a lot of these questions is we're working on kind of bleeding edge jurisdictional issues in New York, Hawaii, and California. And one of them is, what are we going to do with natural gas? And as we work on long-term decarbonization scenarios, you'll see that our firm has split personalities on this. At the same time, we say natural gas is a critical resource for making the transition to clean energy away from coal towards natural gas. That's a decarbonization benefit. We also realize the need to move away long-term from the actual gas itself. We've tried to make this fine distinction between using less gas, but also maintaining existing facilities to be able to use gas effectively as an integrating resource for higher renewables. Next slide, please. One of the questions that always gets asked is, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Does everything you say over the last 30 years get thrown out? We were asked that same question when we had all the big California fires, or when the Northeast basically was blowing up pipelines as well. You know, does a fundamental pandemic, we think, change the direction of where we're going on climate change? And as we saw from Schwarzenegger through to Brown and to Newsom with the fires, we think actually this is a long-term trend. It's been a long-term trend. I know everybody is fighting to see beyond the pandemic we're in now, but we think there's an interesting opportunity, if you go to the next slide, to actually double down on a bunch of the movement away from gas use and still maintain gas facilities for renewable integration. For those of you who are familiar with our work, we run a whole bunch of what-if cases, and it's a kind of what Amber Mahone in our group, you'd like to say, it's a backwards forecast. We know where we have to get to, 80 by 50, say, for example, in terms of carbon reduction, and we work backwards by sector to figure out if that's really true, what do we have to know and what do we have to do? And if you see this orange line on the bottom, one way to do this is basically at the same time we're doing more and more renewables in the power sector, we're electrifying buildings and we're electrifying transportation, 3 of the 4 pillars we always identify in all these studies. People kind of laugh at this high electrification scenario because it's very hard to do. The private sector, it's in buildings, it requires deep retrofits, and we haven't been very successful in doing deep retrofits before. But if you look now at this crisis period and you look what states are going to need to do to fill their budget gaps, and cities as well, The electrification scenario is the scenario that builds long-term jobs. In terms of the clean energy transition, the job-producing industry that's going to carry all the jobs and the tax base and the decarbonization piece is the high electrification scenario. It's not the renewable build scenario that people like to talk about. It's certainly the high electrification scenario, which is this bottom orange curve here. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to drive home this case that even if we are doing the high electrification scenario, and that's the case that New York and California and other jurisdictions with high renewables and decarbonization goals pursue, that doesn't mean go out and get rid of all the gas facilities. A good friend of mine in a big giant utility in the Northeast said, here's the way I look at the strategy. It's hurry up and do gas and then hurry up and get rid of it. When he says get rid of it, it doesn't mean get rid of the gas facility. If you look at Hawaii, we've got all the facilities in place all the way through 2040, and then we put biofuel in those facilities at the end, not using a tremendous amount of biofuel, but using a lot less gas and keeping the facilities. We've done a lot of work that natural gas is a natural storage system that coexists with the electric system, and together they provide reliable, low-cost transition to a decarbonized world for at least the next, 15 to 20 years if we see it in most of our cases. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan Oss to take you through some more details on the future of natural gas.
Dan, I think you're muted.
Thank you for that. One of many times I've done that over the course of this pandemic. If we can pop forward a couple slides, it'd be great. So Ren set out a couple of some of the high-level issues with gas and its future in the West. What I'm going to focus on is recent work that E3 has done looking at long-term trade-offs between that electrification future and a sort of more gas-based future. I'm really going to focus a lot of my time today on direct use of gas, so not the electricity sector, because Matt Barmack will be following me from Calpine, and I think he'll summarize what that looks like in a way that's very, very consistent with what E3 would say. So when we're looking at this sort of choice between electrification versus gas, what you're really talking about is decarbonizing heat throughout the West. That's both used to provide space heating for your buildings or hot water, but also heat for industry. And there's two main pathways. There's a decarbonized gas pathway, where we're using renewable natural gas or hydrogen, and then an electrification pathway where we're using things like heat pumps, electric resistant, a variety of other ways you can use electric power to produce heat. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to walk through now is that first pathway, that decarbonized gas pathway, and I'm going to show you an example from a report that we did with the California Energy Commission on the future of gas in California. It just came out about a month ago, so I encourage you all to go to our website and check it out. So what this graph shows is California's natural gas supply, both in the future, in that blue dotted line, and in a scenario where we decarbonize most of electricity, in that black dotted line. So what you can see is decarbonizing electricity in California, as is the law via SB 100, really takes a pretty good chunk out of the overall gas demand. So when Ren showed you that slide that showed various gas demand scenarios, you'll notice that in all of them, gas demand goes down in California. The question is, if we aren't going to do electrification, how can we decarbonize what's left? So that's sort of 1.3 quadrillion BTU of energy in 2050. So I want to point you to the y-axis. This is going to be our dollars per MBTU, all in 2018 dollars, and we'll walk through a few different, what we're calling tranches of the RNG supply curve. And the first is biomethane, and this is sort of the lowest cost version of decarbonized gas. And biomethane is produced, from familiar feedstocks like waste biogas from anaerobic digestion, so you have dairies, wastewater treatment plants, and the like. But there's also sort of more advanced forms of biomethane that are produced via gasification of, say, forest waste or agricultural waste. And again, these are sort of the lowest cost resource, but they're fundamentally limited in their quantity because there's only so much waste biomass out there in the world. Once you've gone through that, you can't produce any more. And furthermore, there's other competing uses for that biomass. You could take some of that biomass and produce something like liquid zero-carbon jet fuel, which you might imagine it's very difficult to electrify a plane, so perhaps that's a higher and better use for that limited resource. Next slide, please. So once you've gone through your limited supply of biomethane, you have to find something else. And sort of the next candidate is hydrogen. And we're talking here about a form of either zero or low carbon hydrogen that can be produced via either electrolysis of water. And if you pair that with a high renewable system, you get either low or zero or very low emissions hydrogen, or via steam methane reformation, but with carbon capture and sequestration. So for the purposes of this slide, we're considering a world where you're blending that hydrogen in with the existing gas in the pipeline. And current gas systems and gas end uses can only handle so much of a hydrogen blend before they start running into issues. For instance, high-pressure gas transmission pipelines become embrittled with high levels of hydrogen, and end uses often not have flame speed or that sort of are calibrated to burn hydrogen efficiently or safely. So the amount of hydrogen you can blend into the pipeline is limited to approximately 7% pipeline energy, or about 20% of the volume in the pipeline, because hydrogen is a less dense gas. Next slide, please. Once you've exhausted that 7% blend, you're left with a need to have some other resource that is sort of less limited by either the quantity of feedstock or the amount that can be blended into the pipeline. And we think the natural next option is what we call synthetic natural gas. It's also called power to methane. And what this does is it takes a source of climate-neutral hydrogen and pairs it with a source of climate-neutral CO2 to produce a climate-neutral CH4 molecule, or methane. So, this is a fairly inefficient process where you both have to produce the CO2 somehow and the hydrogen somehow and then combine the two. And there's two ways to get the CO2. One is there's a nice tie-in with your biofuels production. So when you make biofuels via most processes, you get a nice stream of use that, or via direct air capture, which felt like science fiction 10 years ago, but is increasingly looked at as a key component of many decarbonization strategies. Next slide, please. Actually, before you move on, I'll just point out, returning to the y-axis. Actually, the next slide's fine. Returning to the y-axis, you'll see that we are in the order of $30 to $90 per MMBTU for that sort of marginal resource of decarbonized gas, significantly more than the sort of $4 to $5 per MMBTU that you see in EIA's forecast of 2050 gas prices. So, you can imagine you can decarbonize a share of the pipeline at, lower incremental costs sticking with the biomethane resource, but things start to get quite expensive as you move into other options. Furthermore, those options are not widely commercialized yet today, and so that's sort of reflected in this broad set of cost scenarios between our optimistic on the bottom and our conservative on the top. So it could be the case that the costs are relatively low, but still quite high, or they could be much, much higher, and that really reflects the technologies. Next slide, please. So in the study that we completed for the CEC, we compared a couple of bookend scenarios, and I'm focusing here on the sort of bottom line for a typical residential customer in California. And these bookend scenarios were a world in which we electrified most of the buildings in California, and a world in which we didn't electrify the buildings, but used a 50% blend from that RNG supply curve I showed you a moment ago. So we didn't go all the way up the curve. We didn't use all the really expensive stuff. We cut it off at about half. To keep things reasonable in terms of cost. What you can see on the left is because we've had such a steep decline in throughput for those remaining gas customers, if you're a mixed fuel customer, so that line in yellow, you're going to start to see your bills increase really, really quickly as more and more customers exit the gas system. This is basically just a classic problem of large fixed costs, low throughput, low user base equals high average cost for everyone who's left. On the right, you'll see a sort of different world, but one that is sort of equally challenging if you're a gas customer. In this world, you see the cost of being a gas customer steadily increase, particularly post-2030 as we blend more expensive types of RNG into the system, to the point where you're going to see bill savings by being a gas customer, by being an all-electric customer relative to a gas customer in this world. And so the key sort of modeling artifact on the right that we made is that we assumed no one left the gas system, right? So there's no exit, there's no economic departures, and there's no sort of increased pressure on the delivery costs of the gas system. So if you can see from that figure, if I'm a rational self-actor, at least some share of people will find it in their interest to leave the gas system. So you could imagine that you might try to go for the world on the right, you might try to go for the RNG strategy, but doing so will push you toward the outcome on the left, no matter what you want. So this sort of motivated in our minds the need to consider a gas transition strategy to start mapping out what a long-term future for the gas system in California might look like. And phase 2 of the proceeding that Matt mentioned is dealing with that additional challenge once the sort of issues of the gas-electric system interface are dealt with in phase 1. All right, next slide, please. But that's California, and this is a group, that's representing a much broader sort of Western region. And we've done work that suggests that conclusions from California do not necessarily hold elsewhere in the West. For instance, I managed a study in the Northwest that looked at the peak impacts of building electrification in that region, which, is not as cold as other places in the West, but is much colder than California. And we found that the winter peak loads in the Northwest could increase by 50% in a scenario that was fairly well managed, and as much as double in a scenario where things sort of happen in a haphazard electrification fashion. And so this made the cost of that scenario fairly similar to a scenario with more limited RNG, so about 25% blend. And so in that world where you could say we're going to decarbonize a quarter of the pipeline, that could perhaps have the same cost as building all the electric capacity to serve the incremental electrification loads. I think what's important is even if you want to go the electrification route, you're going to have to think about the impacts of that on gas generation quite a bit, because if we're going to be reliably serving peak loads, as Matt from Calpine will speak to in a moment, we're probably going to need gas generation in order to do that, and we're going to need a lot of it in order to maintain reliability. So, if you electrify direct use gas, you might end up with more upstream gas combustion. I also know that there's some pretty important deliverability considerations to consider. So if you're west of the Cascades or in the LA Basin, it's one thing to say there's enough renewable somewhere in the West, but I need to get those over the Cascades or into the basin, and I need to get them there on those peak periods, or I need to get gas built in those regions on those peak periods. And both of those are really challenging issues that we think warrant further study and consideration. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end by acknowledging there's a lot of uncertainty in the future of gas in the West. We think there's some pretty firm conclusions you can draw in some cases, but not in others. But I want to offer a few hypotheses that I think some of which are more proven than others, but all of them are worth considering. The first is that in any world where we're on pace to achieve existing climate policy objectives as stated by states like Colorado, Washington, New Mexico, California, gas use in aggregate is going to decline in the West. But the regional gas system will nonetheless continue to be valuable because of its ability to reliably store and deliver energy. And I'll note that RNG supply curve, that I showed earlier has some expensive tranches of gas, but expensive gas could be very, very valuable in certain contexts. But all that being said, in buildings, the consumer economics will likely favor electrification over RNG, or at least over a lot of RNG. But in colder climates, you're really going to have to pay attention to the peak impacts in order to mitigate those challenges. And so if you're a gas LDC or one of the regulators or a policymaker thinking about the long-term role of gas in your gas distribution system in particular, your low-pressure system, it's really worth thinking about potential transition strategies, ways to manage the level of investments over time in a way that makes sense for your company, for your consumers, and for society in general. And what that means in warmer climates, we think, is that you're going to need to reckon with the cost recovery and equity challenges as customer counts decline. In colder climates, there's a lot more options, a lot more wiggle room, and a lot more uncertainty on what the best option is. But one option that we think warrants consideration, perhaps, is some sort of hybrid approach where you use a heat pump for some of the year and gas furnaces back up. In effect, you're providing that peak service that an electric power plant can provide, but you're providing it via direct use combustion instead. So, there's a whole lot more to be said on this topic. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation, and thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks, Ren and Dan. I'm going to keep the panelists' presentations moving, and then we'll take plenty of time for Q&A, and I'll facilitate a little discussion after the initial presentation. So let's move right along. I think our next presenter is Will Brown, with Kinder Morgan. Will is a vice president in the commercial pipeline business. So take it away, Will. Tell us what the perspective of a gas operator is on all this.
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're safe and healthy through these very interesting times, and hopefully you can hear me okay today. Really what I'd like to, first of all, just say thank you to the EIM for having me out today. Really want to show you from our perspective and try to separate really perception versus reality as it relates to renewable growth and natural gas. You just heard from E3 and their views of really natural gas and what it's going to look like over time. We believe that the runway for natural gas, particularly when you start looking at really what's going on with renewables, we think the runway for natural gas is going to be quite a long ways. And so with that, I'd like to just talk a little bit about really natural gas's role in the clean energy future, and then certainly about trying to dispel really what's perception versus reality and what we see from a pipeline perspective. Now remember that Kinder Morgan is the largest natural gas pipeline company in the country, and out west we've delivered almost 40% natural gas to the markets out west. So we have a lot of experience as it relates to deliverability, and I'll talk about that quite a bit this afternoon, and transportation of natural gas to these very large markets. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to start off with is really just a simple case study of what is happening with natural gas as it relates to and how it relates to renewables. This is a case study in the Front Range of Colorado. I live currently in Colorado Springs at 7,000 feet, where really this is a climate that really needs natural gas, and I'm thankful that we do have it. When you look at a situation where we had back in October, typically it doesn't snow and we don't get good cold weather in Colorado until really late October. But what had happened earlier October, primarily in the first half of October, we started getting some cold weather. And then towards the end of October, we really started getting a lot of cold weather. And so what I'm showing you here in this graphic is the load that was in the Colorado Front Range, primarily Denver, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo in Colorado. The black line that you see there is the total load and the total demand that we see out west during this time frame from basically October 21st through the end of the month. We've also showed you the amount of fossil generation that was used to manage that load, and you can see it fluctuating along with demand. But we're also showing you what was going on in wind in the orange, what's happening in solar in the purple, and then hydro. Believe it or not, Colorado does have a little bit of hydro. And time again in these three times that you see, we have a lot of times where we lose wind, we lose solar, and guess what? What's got to come up and backstop it? It has to be natural gas. Natural gas primarily is the load following characteristic technology that will backstop when renewable generation ceases. So you can see predominantly when the wind is stopping, when we get cloud cover and the solar stopping, you're going to see natural gas generation as coming up, ramping, and meeting those loads for the reliability that we need. So that was just a simple example that just recently occurred of why natural gas is going to be needed. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Did I lose folks?
Well, yeah. Well, I think your video may be slow, but we're hearing your audio okay. What's the title of the slide you want up?
Slide 3, GHG comparison of generation sources, please.
Yeah, I think we need to back up on slide. There we go. Thank you. Okay, we're seeing it now.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Sorry, I'm not seeing it. All right, so this is another example of what we'd like to show you as it relates to the differing types of generation that are out there and give you a perspective on cost, total emissions, and certainly talk a little bit about the reliability. So I want to take three examples, and generally we'll talk about the first one as a combined cycle example where 100% of the load is being met by a combined cycle gas turbine on a particular day. And what that graphic shows you is the amount of gigawatts that are being generated for a load. And again, I'm taking a very hypothetical load that's very flat. You could simply argue that the actual load has a load profile during the day, but just for all intents and purposes, make it easy. We'll make a very simple ratable load profile here, and then I'm going to compare that to solar plus a combustion turbine, and then solar plus batteries if batteries were able to do this load following component. So first of all, when you look at the combined cycle element, if you look at a total capex of that is approximately $49 billion to generate that load. And again, this load is about what a summertime load in California you would see. Then I would like to talk a little bit about Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. When we talk about emissions, a lot of things get lost when we talk about emissions. We really need to talk about total emissions, and total emissions are the addition of Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are the actual tailpipe emissions, and I'm talking about the amount of CO2 that's being generated by each day out of the tailpipe. Scope 2 emissions are the indirect emissions that are being generated. For example, if I had to charge my phone and I had to plug in my phone, I know that some of that electricity that's coming through the wall is being generated by fossil, either natural gas or coal. So those are Scope 2 emissions. And then finally, Scope 3 emissions are the emissions required to actually build the unit, to actually build the facility, the steel, the concrete, everything that is the wire, everything that is about that. These scope emission numbers actually come from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They don't come from Kinder Morgan. They come from NREL. The costs, we're also using levelized costs from Lazard. These are all third-party, reputable third parties that are out there. So when you look at a combined cycle, $49 billion and roughly 10 million metric tons of Scope 3 emissions to build it. Why is that? Well, natural gas is 1 million times more energy dense than renewables, whether it be wind or solar. So now let's compare that to solar plus a combustion turbine in the next row. And what you're seeing here is, again, the same load. You're seeing that solar is roughly running if the sun is shining that day. Sun is providing a generation for approximately, call it, 14 to 16 hours. And then you have the combustion turbine that comes up to meet the load profile in the hours that the sun's not shining. Well, when you look at the cost to do that, that's $158 billion to do that. And the reason why is because of the solar costs. It's 3 times more the combined cycle. It's a little bit more, has a little bit more of scope emissions, Scope 1 and 2, because the combustion turbine is not as efficient as a combined cycle turbine. And then, but look at the Scope 3 emissions. The Scope 3 emissions are far greater than the emissions from a combined cycle. Now, this is suggesting that the combined cycle is running, it's there, and so when you're replacing solar, or you're putting in solar and replacing combined cycle, you can see the amount of emissions that are being developed and created. The same thing goes with, if you skip down to the the next couple of rows, you'll see solar plus lithium-ion batteries. The amount of CapEx is extremely expensive at $518 billion compared to the $49 billion for the combined cycle. Yes, the amount of solar plus lithium-ion batteries does have a little bit more scope emissions because it's got to still be connected to the grid. But then look at the overall Scope 3 emissions that are being created. There's a tremendous amount of emissions that are being created to build less energy dense and less energy efficient technologies. And so when we talk about gas and we talk about fossil and we talk about the ability to serve loads, you really need to talk about the amount of cost, the amount of total emissions, not just the tailpipe emissions coming out the stack, but the total emissions that are being generated and created with these different technologies. This is why we think natural gas is going to continue to play a very important role as we move forward. Next slide, please. When you look at the emission comparison on the previous slide, I'll plot it a little bit differently for you. This is a graphic that shows the amount of CO2 that is being created or generated as it relates to time going across the horizontal axis. The black line depicts the combined cycle that I mentioned a while ago and the amount of CO2 that's generated by the combined cycle. If you compare that to a battery plus a solar, which is what I talked about earlier in the blue line, they will cross over at approximately 250 months or so. Again, but we know that solar will not last. It has to be replaced, and we're saying that both batteries have to be replaced every 8 years, wind has to be replaced every 20 years, and solar facilities replaced every 30 years roughly. And again, these are elements as it relates to NREL that we're using. And so if you take a look at the red line, you see that the battery plus solar model never crosses over the combined cycle. You would be better off running the combined cycle than installing a tremendous amount of batteries, tremendous amount of solar in order to create less emissions. Because it's very important that you utilize and you see and you capture the data relative to Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Next slide, please, and I'll summarize. So the clean energy future is real. It's gathering pace. You've heard our speakers talk about electrification, which in our opinion is extremely energy inefficient, and we'd be better off utilizing the technologies that we currently have, continue to use CO2 sequestration, things of that nature to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Natural gas is very cheap. It's very abundant. Now what we're learning with certainly COVID-19 is that natural gas is even cheaper. It's extremely energy dense. It's clean. It's efficient. But clearly it's dispatchable, which means it's reliable. It is the technology that can come up when the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, and batteries right now only have roughly a 3 to 4 hour battery life. So you've got to have gas in those extra hours. We believe that our pipelines facilitate not only transportation of natural gas, but also deliverability, key deliverability. And you've got to use line pack and you've got to use storage assets to do that. And so we believe our infrastructure, again, is the primary source of the reductions of GHG emissions. Why? Because coal continues to shut down. Gas is cheaper, and it is cleaner than natural gas. And again, if you want a different perspective, we believe that the Planet of the Humans, the Michael Moore YouTube video that now has 6 million views, that was published on Earth Day, really can give you another perspective on that, and not necessarily listening to the pipeline. That's all I had today, and I appreciate again the time.
Great, thanks, Will. All right, with that, we're going to transition from the gas side to the electric side and hand it off to Matt Barmack, who's a director with Calpine. And Matt, we've got an audience of EIM stakeholders and market participants here, so I think, my goal in bringing you into the discussion is to say, let's bring it home. What's the connection that people should draw to the electric market?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
All right. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the role of gas generation in a decarbonizing California and Western grid, and I guess I'm going to come at this from, I guess, what might be considered more of a conventional perspective than Will's. I'm assuming that, you know, renewables and batteries are going to continue, their penetrations are going to continue to grow. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is just what is the role of gas in that kind of future. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Just, you know, for those of you who don't know, Calpine is a very large independent power producer. Most of our portfolio is modern gas-fired generation. It's concentrated in California, Texas, and then the competitive Northeast markets. Next slide, please. And just a little bit more detail on our presence in the West. You know, our portfolio is really concentrated around the Bay Area. That's where we started. So we have about 6 gigawatts of capacity in California. Most of that is kind of modern combined cycle. We also have combined cycles at Hermiston in Oregon and South Point in Arizona, and then the Geysers geothermal plant. Next slide, please. So I really just wanted to make 3 relatively quick points so we can get into more of a dialogue. But the 3 points, which I'll preview for you now. You know, first I want to talk about gas as a capacity resource as part of a portfolio that also includes a lot of renewables and storage. And you know, Dan and Ren kind of teed this up already. And I want to talk a little bit about, you know, why gas is still a part of a portfolio that, you know, we're anticipating will have lots of renewables and storage. Why is gas still needed? And then finally talk about how, you know, the West, which for a long time has had too much capacity, why that's no longer the case, and sort of the gas capacity in particular is becoming scarcer. So first on why gas is an important capacity resource, or how it's sort of complementary to renewables and storage. This is a little bit unfair given that Ren and Dan spoke already, but I wanted to briefly summarize the results of a study that we did with E3, where we looked at exactly this question, you know, is there a role for gas-fired generation in a decarbonized California grid? And this, you know, this diagram basically summarizes the study and the results. The green panel on the left shows the extent of the decarbonization that we modeled. So turned out to be, you know, roughly 90% of the emissions out of the electricity sector, even as the electricity sector, you know, we projected it growing for some of the reasons that Ren and Dan explained. Part of the modeling involved simulating the economic retention of gas-fired generation. So the model actually had the capability to retire gas if it was economic to do so and replace it with something else. And generally what we found is the model would retain most of the more modern gas-fired generation. So starting from roughly 31 gigawatts, which is what we expect to have in California after the final once-through cooling units go away, you know, we simulated some retirements to get down to about 25 gigawatts of gas capacity, but sort of level off there. Even as is shown in the purple panel on the right,
even as we're adding massive amounts of solar and storage. So to hit our decarbonization target in 2050, we're adding 110 gigawatts of utility-scale solar and 74 gigawatts of batteries with an average duration of 6 hours. And so, you know, even with that 74 gigawatts of storage, the 25 gigawatts of gas is really important. If we try to get rid of it entirely, we get the rightmost bar in the purple panel, which is we need an even more massive solar and storage overbuild, 254 gigawatts of utility-scale solar and 150 gigawatts of batteries with 15-hour duration to maintain a reliable system. So, you know, there are a lot of important assumptions and subtle, you know, modeling details that underlie all this. But I think it you know, sort of starts to show that gas is an important capacity resource. And let me go even with oodles of solar and oodles of storage, and let me go into a little bit more about why that is. So next slide, please. Yeah, and I think, you know, both maybe Ren, Dan, and Will all kind of alluded to this issue. You know, the key thing about gas is it's not energy limited or fuel limited. And it turns out that that's really important for getting through critical reliability events, which, you know, in this future that we're modeling with much higher electrification loads and much greater dependence on renewables, these kind of reliability events tend to be associated with multi-day periods of low renewable generation in the summer, in the winter. These aren't the typical kind of summer reliability problems that we have now. And so, you know, this picture just illustrates, you know, it's kind of like Will's week on the Front Range. This is sort of a similar scenario where there isn't gas generation available. The black line is the load. The yellow is the solar, the purple is the storage discharge, and the red is the unserved load that's left over. So the first few days in this 10-day period, you know, there's solar in the middle of the day that can serve load, and it can partially charge the batteries, and then they discharge in the evening, but they get drained, and so there's actually unserved load overnight and into the next morning. And then in the middle of this stretch, things get really bad. You know, you could think of this as like a winter storm really limiting solar production. So the solar is insufficient to even, you know, really meet load in the middle of the day, and it can't fill the batteries at all. So once the sun goes down, there's really no resource available to serve load. Gas, you know, if it were available, could fill in those kinds of gaps. Next slide, please. One back, I hope. There we go. I just wanted to flag that, you know, sort of the fact that gas isn't energy limited, it's relevant not just to system level reliability issues that have sort of been the focus of the discussion today so far. It also can be important in local areas. So this is just a figure that I lifted from the CAISO's most recent local capacity study. It shows what load in a particular load pocket on a peak day would look like So the yellow line is the load, and then the red line is the emergency, sort of import limit into this load pocket, sort of following, an outage of another transmission line. And so, what I want to highlight is that entire area between the yellow line and the red line, in order to maintain reliable electric service, there needs to be some resource inside the local area that can fill in the area between the yellow and the red lines. And so, that's not the 4-hour batteries that are being developed extensively right now. Because a lot of the you can see just a lot of the needs under that curve extend for more than 4 hours. And the other thing is, not only are resources that can fill in that gap, not only do they need that much energy, but if they're batteries, they also have to be able to charge. And so if you look at the kind of off-peak hours in this picture, there's very limited room between the yellow and the red lines for storage to charge. So, this is sort of a, we've been talking about this issue a little bit at the system level, and it's getting a lot more attention at the local level. So in this most recent study, the CAISO concluded that that there could be reliance on 400 megawatts of batteries with, I guess, 9 hours of duration in this specific load pocket, which is somewhat ironic because the PUC has already approved like 558 megawatts of storage in this load pocket, hoping that it will obviate the need for gas, which it appears that it won't. So next slide, please. Yeah. So finally, I talked a little bit about how I think gas or some equivalently non-energy limited capacity resource is really important for reliability. There isn't this vast overhang of gas capacity like there was maybe 5 years ago. I know this is an EIM group. Maybe this is an issue more for California than actually the surrounding regions, but historically, either kind of implicitly or explicitly, California relied on a lot of the merchant gas capacity in Arizona and Nevada. But over the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of that capacity has been contracted by load-serving entities in Arizona, and so this table just lists those merchant plants and if they're under contract now, to whom. So grab this capacity while you still can. Anyway, I really appreciate the invitation to speak, and I'm looking forward to more of a dialogue.
Great, thanks, Ben. So we're at almost 2 o'clock, and I want to save some time for audience or stakeholder Q&A. So I'm going to tease one question and ask each of the panelists to kind of give us a perspective while folks are raising their hand. Can we get a reminder from the host of how to submit yourself into the question queue?
Sure. As a reminder, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question.
Okay. So
do you have a question?
This is the facilitator. So while we're queuing up those questions, I want to ask each of the panelists quickly just, give us the 5, 10, and 20-year perspective. So is the I think that each of you kind of paint a picture of how difficult this transition gets as we go deeper and deeper into renewable penetration, electrification, retirement of the coal and once through cooling units. Clearly there comes a point where this has to be addressed. So I'm going to ask each just what's your trend prediction? Is this something that's already on the horizon in some places now? Is it more of a investment question for folks who are looking to build new infrastructure and new generating plant now in the maybe 10, 20-year horizon? So let's start with E3.
I'll jump in on that, Matt, and then Dan, add anything if you want. I think it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at GEN by itself, you can see our scenarios look a lot like Matt's in some ways. There's a long runway for gas. Lower gas and lower gas use, but a long runway for gas facilities. And what Matt said is right. It's a cost-effective way to provide integration and capacity resources. But if you look at Dan's slides, you get a different picture. If you're PG&E or if you're SDG&E and you own SoCalGas and SDG&E, you've got this difficult problem in that you can't go 20 years and support both infrastructures in a safe and reliable way. It's too expensive. And you're going to have gas on electric competition. So it goes back to, if we're controlling this at the end-use level, 20 years from now, we don't have anything left but gas cooking. And if gas water heating's gone, all the new construction, it's all gone, et cetera. We don't have a business model to make this work for gas delivery. So the pipe company, I've called it, Matt, I've called it, bankruptcy 3, is to do this in an effective way. We need, I know PG&E wouldn't like that, but that's exactly why there's a potential case now that's being made for what is a smart transition, given that we have different time frames for this in the gen business versus the distribution business.
Just to add on the generation side, a bit of geographic differentiation. Matt showed slides showing California is going to need to keep its gas capacity. I think across the West, with all of the coal retirements we're expecting over the coming decades, there's going to be regions that are going to need to add more gas capacity in all likelihood. And I think the Pacific Northwest is sort of a shining example of this. More by our account and accounts of other sort of organizations in the region, the Northwest is already capacity short today when the sort of industry standard reliability metrics, and that will only get worse as more coal retires. And so, storage is particularly limited in its ability to provide reliability in the Northwest. So gas capacity is going to be critically important there in the relatively near term to get that resource balance back to where we want it.
Okay. Will, maybe I'll toss it to you next. You're pretty bullish on a long runway for gas. Mm-hmm. Where is kind of the threshold of pain? Is it 80% renewable penetration, 90%? Where do you start to see a real revenue shortfall for maintaining the infrastructure, or does that threshold never get hit?
Yeah, good question. If you look at some of the parties that are out in the public, like Xcel Energy, for example, they've recently come out and said, look, once you get up above 40% of renewable penetration, the costs just get astronomical, and it's going to require a different set of technology other than lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries, really at their best right now, can only get 4 hours, and we don't see that improving because it's hard to shove electrons into rocks and get electrons back out of rocks efficiently without causing too much heat. And so you're going to have a technology shift in order to continue to see erosion of gas infrastructure. Furthermore, I think when you get costs as economical as if they start to grow astronomical that we showed earlier, ultimately I believe you're going to have a policy shift. And the policy shift is going to be like, look, we can't have 100% renewables, but we certainly can maybe be 100% carbon free. And that's where you're going to have those kinds of things will introduce new technologies like carbon capture, for example, hydrogen, for example, things of that nature. So again, until those things play out, I think gas has got a long 30, 40, 50, maybe even longer years. The gas pipelines, certainly if they're maintained and they are, if they're maintained and they're taken care of and we know exactly how much metal's in the ground, pipeline in theory could last for a long, long time. We have pipelines in the ground that have been there since the 20s. And again, we feel very comfortable with those pipelines because we know exactly how much metal is in the ground to maintain the pressure in the pipe. So those are my views. I think it's going to require a policy shift to really, because the costs are going to be astronomical, in my opinion.
So you're hearing different views here, but affordability as a feedback loop, you know, guiding policy to a better place. Matt Farmack, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would echo some of the thoughts of the other panelists. I mean, you know, as a gas generator, you know, in the near term, I see some limited displacement of gas-fired generation, probably with relatively short duration storage. But you know, I think rolling forward a little bit, maybe this is happening already faster than I thought, but I think there'll be, you know, sort of more recognition of the issues associated with reliance on energy-limited resources like short-duration storage, and then, you know, also I expect the electrification loads to start increasing, especially, you know, sort of post-2030, which will just, you know, sort of increase demand for capacity generally. You know, one issue I wanted to tease out a little bit is, you know, we seem to be talking about the gas distribution system as if it's kind of homogeneous, but I think they're you know, they're the fat pipes and they're the narrow pipes. And, you know, because of a lot of the things that Dan discussed, you know, I could see, you know, maybe some of the smaller pipes don't have as much of a future, but it may be relatively low cost on a sort of per unit basis to maintain the fat pipes that, say, would support a lot of electric generation. And I'll just add, you know, because we got asked this question quite a bit about our study. Well, you know, what if gas generation has to bear more of the costs of the gas infrastructure? Would gas generation still be economic as a capacity resource? And I think, you know, based on how we modeled the costs of gas generation, there's room for gas generation to bear more gas infrastructure costs and still be economic as sort of an electric capacity resource. You know, looking out 20 years, I think I'm with Will. You know, if the region really is going to go to 100% or net zero or whatever, you know, we're going to need to be looking at a much wider range of technologies, and so, you know, we're very actively exploring hydrogen and CCS and you know, long duration storage, you know, other than lithium ion, and, you know, things that we probably haven't even thought of yet. So, you know, 20 years is a long time from now.
Great. Okay, I think with that we should throw it to the question queue. Operator?
Yes, we have one question in the queue. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Tony Braun. I'm a RIF liaison. I think my question is for Ren. You alluded to some of the equitable issues in general with respect to gas throughput and paying for the gas system. Has anyone taken a look and tried to quantify for example, what the impact would be on retail natural gas customers that aren't in the generation business?
Yeah, it's a good question. Dan has done that a couple different ways, and that was what he was trying to show in that one case where the gas, delivery costs go up. And I think, in the short term, you're seeing it already with the safety issues that are being placed, on new gas service and existing gas service. And if we basically create the death spiral on the gas side, that's when you get not only the new costs put onto existing customers with no choices and can't put PV on the roof and can't buy lithium-ion battery, for the garage. Not that it's smart anyway, but if they can't get off, they're going to be stuck on that gas system with higher and higher costs, as you allude to.
Yeah, and just to add, this is an important component of discussion of the cost structure of gas utilities that Matt Barmack alluded to. The small pipes, the local distribution pipes, are usually going to be on the order of 65–70% of the gas utility's gas revenue requirement. The transmission and storage assets are going to be about 30%. So the residential and commercial customers, and most of the residential customers, are paying for that 70%. So you start getting sort of a big number divided over a small number, and things start getting really, really expensive really fast if you're one of the remaining customers. For everyone else, the electric generators, the industrials, anyone who's connected to this sort of higher pressure service, you're not seeing a 95% drop in gas demand. You're seeing gas demand drop in half, at worst. So if you're trying to allocate those remaining costs, half your demand goes away, you can imagine just on the back of the envelope, costs are roughly going to for the remaining customers. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but that's just a sort of heuristic to think about the impacts on everyone else, industrials, electric generation, et cetera.
I don't know if I'm able to follow up technically here, but I mean, a line is one thing, but a dollar per month or dividing it into a per unit charge for an end-use customer, has anyone gotten that specific?
Yeah, in our CEC report, there's a documentation of the rate impacts for electric generation, industrials, and transportation. Meaning compressed natural gas customers.
Okay. Operator, more questions yet in queue?
We have no further questions as of now.
Okay, I'll offer a question myself. So, there are a lot of interesting, gas and electric use are intertwined, and there's a lot of interesting feedback loops and everything that you all have discussed. So I'm curious, as a audience of primarily electric wholesale market participants, what do you see happening with the price dynamics of electricity? So, we're talking about the gas-fired generation primarily serving a smaller number of hours, but in, a high reliability need for weather contingencies, intermittent renewable contingencies, ramping at the end of the solar day, for example. Does that change? So walk us through the feedback loop. That means that there's less throughput, but the gas-fired units are going to recover, more of their costs from those high reliability hours. Is that going to lead to more volatility in electric markets? Is it going to change the balance between what's recovered through capacity pricing for those units that have resource adequacy contracts versus energy pricing and what, a merchant plan is looking to recover from the market? Maybe I'll toss it to Matt Barmack first if you're able to make some predictions, at least in public.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just described is kind of happening already. I mean, you look at, just what's been going on in the market the last few days, and I mean, it's probably pretty representative of the future because the loads are, down from COVID, and we have, lots of solar, and we've got some kind of spring runoff, although it's not a high hydro year. So, the market conditions are sort of like what we would expect to see in a few years with even higher penetrations of renewables. And you see zero or very low energy prices across the middle of the day, even day ahead, and relatively high prices, especially considering how low gas prices are right now. A little bit in the morning, but especially in the early evening hours. So, I think that will be sort of a pretty common pattern. I'm not sure the high prices in the evening are enough to make up for, all the money that we used to make in the middle of the afternoon. So it does put more pressure on capacity compensation. So I would expect that, at least in California, where there's kind of an explicit resource adequacy regime, that our compensation will shift even more towards capacity and potentially away from energy and ancillaries.
And I think I'm tempted to give the last word to Ren on this subject. So, maybe you can project what Matt Barmak just described to more of a west-wide scenario. So how should we be thinking as a region about, the future compensation for gas-fired generation in a world where, perhaps multiple states, if not all of the states, are chasing this remaining capacity and trying to have it under contract to supply their reliability needs? What's the right kind of balance of compensation? Is there a missing money problem? Is there a different contract structure that's needed? Maybe more of an option contract for certain resources?
Yeah, Matt, that's a really good question, and Matt Barmak kind of hit it on the head with what you're seeing right now. So there's this thing called the missing money problem, and that is we send short-run price signals into a market, and we expect short-run behavioral changes, and then we need a sufficient amount of capacity to be able to keep the system, as the other Matt told you, going during all times and reliable. And what we're seeing is already into the future, we're used to a world where maybe half of the costs are capacity and half of the costs are fixed, and half of the costs are variable. We're going to a world very quickly where 80, 90, 100%, or nearly 100% of the costs are fixed. And we have a market design that sends short-run market price signals that don't have anything to do with fixed costs. So we've set ourselves up, this is not just the West-wide, we set ourselves up across North America with a short-run market price signal paradigm. We largely let the other bilateral world take care of itself, and similar problems in Eastern markets too, even with a formal bid-based capacity market. And this missing money problem is going to become critical even sooner. Calpine's been talking a lot about it early, just in different markets and different issues. I think load service entities don't want to hear it because they like being able to get capacity in the form of energy real time, and as long as there's excess, it's all fine. When you're short, then the question is who's going to finance the new build needed to keep the system reliable?
I can't think of a better place to tie up this discussion, so I want to pause and thank all our panelists. Operator, let's just take one more check if there are any questions in queue. And
yes, we do have a question.
Okay.
Go ahead and ask the question. I think the question was raised by Erin. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, this is Erin Kester with Avangrid Renewables, and I know, Matt, you were just trying to wrap the conversation up. But I did have, just one, I just wanted to compliment all of the panelists on this opportunity to get educated on the state of natural gas and looking into the future. Very eye-opening to me, someone who works for a renewables company, frequently looking at things from a renewables generation perspective. So I, appreciate this forum. I did have a question related to renewable natural gas. It's, been, I guess, appearing in different stakeholder forums where, this conversation is taking place that, renewable natural gas will replace conventional gas. And I guess from your perspective, what are the barriers to renewable natural gas in California? I know that E3 did mention that there is a limit to, availability of product to create biogas. Are there other barriers that would prohibit renewable natural gas to replace conventional gas? Thank you for your time.
Yeah, let's point that to Dan, I think.
Yeah, it's a little bit nuanced. So in that supply curve, I went through the biomethane, which is fundamentally limited by the feedstocks. And there's sort of, in theory, unlimited amounts with that power to methane or SNG technology. But the challenge with that one is that it doesn't really exist yet at any commercial scale. So it's a bit of a risky strategy to say that we're going to decarbonize, say, buildings with this expensive technology that doesn't exist yet at any meaningful scale. The other one that's worth mentioning that sometimes gets lumped under RNG but is distinct is hydrogen. You could, in principle, convert the entire gas system to just deliver 100% hydrogen, potentially at sort of lower cost than using that synthetic natural gas. But then you're sort of in a world where you're imagining tearing out a lot of infrastructure and replacing it with new infrastructure that's capable of delivering that resource, safely and reliably. So there's a lot of uncertainties on that question. I'd say that the biggest hub of activity and research in that is in Europe right now, where the trend seems to be let's figure out ways to deliver hydrogen to industry via sort of the big pipes and to electric generators for reliability purposes. So taking our gas generators, converting them to combust hydrogen instead of methane.
Okay, with that, I'm going to take our panel again and hand it back over to you, Pam, for the next topic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, panelists, for the lively conversation, and I think a lot of new information for me, and hopefully a good opportunity for our stakeholders to learn about some of the future predictions around gas. Our next set of panelists are from our latest EIM entities to go live, from Seattle City Light and the Salt River Project, and so the first will be from SRP's Go Live experience with Kent Price and Melissa Martinez. And then we'll have Joy from Seattle City Light, supported by some of her technical team, to present on Seattle's Go Live. And I will note an extreme appreciation of Joy, who was able to step in at the last moment for a sick colleague who was not able to make today's presentation. So please be kind to Joy with your questions. I will also note that this is a very timely presentation because we have 9 entities who are scheduled to go live over the next 2 years. And we may be even adding more to that. And some of the experience from these 2 go live opportunities, I think, will lay some of the groundwork to enable the ISO to accommodate such a large number of simultaneous EIM entities going live. And also what a real testament to this market growth that is, that we're seeing such quick and rapid and large growth over the next 2 years. So with that, I will turn it over to Kent and Melissa from SRP to talk about their Go Live experience.
Thank you very much, Pam. My name is Kent Price. I'm with the Salt River Project in Phoenix, Arizona, and with me is Melissa Martinez. We are each project managers for the EIM, SRP's EIM implementation. So next slide, please. So for those of you who aren't real familiar with SRP, Salt River Project is a water and power provider in the Phoenix metropolitan area. We have a publicly elected board and council, and we are the largest raw water supplier for the Metro Phoenix area. On the electric side, we have more than 1 million customers, and we've had a summer peak load of approximately 7,300 megawatts. And in order to serve that load, we have approximately 8,300 megawatts of generation from a very diverse fuels mix, and that includes nuclear, coal, natural gas, hydro with pump storage, solar, wind, geothermal, batteries, and biomass. Of our resources, we have 26 participating resources in EIM, and by all accounts, by both CAISO and SRP, our April 1, 2020 participation and go live was a very smooth transition, even with everything going on around us with the COVID and all of the issues there. So next slide, please. And part of that smooth transition, we believe, was because we felt we were very well prepared for our go-live date. We had a 3-year time plan for putting everything into production for our EIM entrance. As you can see here with some of the high-level issues that we went, a lot of things were going on in parallel paths, everything going all at once, and sometimes it felt like it was going very quickly. But as you can see, there was a lot of software upgrades and additions that we made, and those are a couple of things that would highlight with our change and upgrade to our energy management system for the entering the EIM. We added a market optimization software in probably the second phase of our additions. We actually had 4 phases of software that we added. And the final one was what we called replacing our legacy software, some of that software that we've been using for decades, quite honestly. All of it came together, bringing both our merchant side and the reliability side into the same platform, but keeping that separation between the two sides of the market and reliability. We had our market simulation and then parallel ops, and we started trading on April 1. So next slide, please. So I'd finally like to end up with my part of the presentation and talk about some of the flexibility that is required for an EIM participant. As you can see here, what I've provided is an example of one of our combined cycle gas-fired generators, 201 CTs. And the green line here is the 5-minute DOT, or dispatch operating target, that's provided to us by CAISO, where we need to be. The yellow line is the actual unit generation, and with only a month of operation, we decided to choose middle of the month, April 13th, and as you can see, the early morning hours, the megawatts on the y-axis, the x-axis is the hours of the day, a 24-hour, just a 1 day. But as you can see, those early morning hours that everybody was just talking about with the panel, those early morning hours from 0 to 8 o'clock, from midnight to 8 o'clock, you can see our generation. We are running our generation, selling into the energy market, and making sure that we're providing the resources that are required into a market that has a strong energy price. And as you see, just after 8 o'clock, as that solar starts to ramp up, our units are ramping down, and that's the flexibility that is required for this market. We ramp down to that minimum, you can see there, of 125 megawatts. These units have what's called a turn-down package. And one of the things that we really stressed when we went out to the plants, we made a number of visits to all of our plants, 3 different rounds with all of them. The first round, we really talked a lot about what EIM is. Here's what's coming. Here, there is change in the air. You will see operation of your plants differently, and you need to be prepared for that. We want you to understand what that is. And talking about that really brought up the fact that you can run full out all the time, or we can actually bring more value to our customers by you ramping down, just like this graph shows, taking it down as low as possible, bringing in that low-cost energy that the market has available, save that value for our customers. Keep those units down. We can't turn them all the way off. We have our reliability issues. We have contingency. We have all those reserves we still need to provide for our customers, and want to make sure that we are a reliable, low-cost power provider. And then, as you see with the rest of the day, as the market changes, the energy prices start to move up, the loads pick up, So do our generators. They're following that dispatch up all the way up into that time when the solar goes off, and our resources are then, again, pulling out close to full load throughout most of the night. So I can't give enough credit to all of our project team that was on from the generation side. We had a cross-functional group that everybody just working together, going out to the plants, talking to them about the things like I mentioned, the beginning of EIM, then going through the generation resource data template, the GRDT, putting the data in, making sure we had the correct data for the units, talking to the plants, making sure they're giving us what can you do reliably, consistently every time, not just what's your best ramp rate or what's that perfect operator, what does he do. Let's make sure that we have what's in there and we can follow these dispatches and make sure that we meet the needs of the market. And then finally going out to them and actually testing units. We had an entire round of testing all our generating resources, participating and non-participating, making sure that they could do what they say and then go out and do it. And so great collaborative effort across all of our groups, generation, our plants, our reliability side, our merchant side, and just everybody working together to make sure that we can meet the needs of the market after serving the needs of our customers first. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa, and she'll get into a few more details about our implementation.
All right, thank you, Kent. And my name is Melissa Martinez. I am another project manager on SRP's EIM implementation. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is SRP's EIM implementation schedule. SRP broke up implementation into 8 implementation areas that you can see on the slide. Each one of these implementation areas had a project manager assigned. And you can see a lot of these were running in parallel. Like Kent mentioned, we had a lot of different pieces moving, and we had to ensure that we started each of these pieces at the right time in order to make sure that our April 1st deadline started. So Kent Price was our project manager for our regulatory and legal changes, our meter upgrade section, and our generation preparation. Tarek Thacker from Utilicast was our project manager in our software implementation area. And in that software implementation area, not only did we have to retire all of that legacy software that Kent mentioned, you know, some had been homegrown in here for decades, we had to also upgrade our EMS system, and we had to change reliability coordinators in the middle of our project. And so all of that rolled into that software implementation portion. From a training and business engagement section, that is what I was in charge of. So ensuring that everybody was ready to participate in EIM. I always say training, training, training. We focused a lot on the training sections. We took over 800 of our users participated in CBTs. We had vendor training. CAISO came and did training. We also had SRP provided training material, and that really flowed into that business engagement section, which was all about organizational change management. A lot of these implementation areas flowed into that last part of the schedule, which says CAISO to SRP connections. And that is the CAISO project plans that the new EIM entities receive. So really working to ensure that we did a lot of work up front so that when our CAISO project plan started, we had a lot of the pieces in movement. So if you move on to the next slide. So this is our EIM implementation team structure. We had an executive sponsor and an overall EIM implementation steering committee, which was comprised of senior leaders around the company with all of our affected departments represented. We had our EIM implementation director, which was Sarah McCoy. She led the EIM program, and then we had 3 sub-teams. One was the EIM PMO, so those were Kent, myself, and Tarek, along with our communication support folks. and training folks. Then we had our EIM business process owners, which were directors and managers comprised of each of those affected areas. And then our technical experts and our leads from each of the areas, sometimes the area leads. And so this entire team structure is how we implemented EIM. If you move on to the next slide. So one of the big things SRP experienced is change management. And we have on the slide here a picture of Linus and his security blanket. A lot of what happens with EIM, and a lot of us felt sometimes that our security blankets were taken away, especially as we retired legacy software that we had been using, some folks for their entire careers. And so change management was really critical to ensuring that every person was supported and had the skills that they needed. And whether that be with training, communication, or leadership support, it was really important to ensure that we had buy-in of all of the decisions and the software and the implementation and the training and support, not only for our end users, but from a leadership perspective. And so leadership and stakeholder engagement and involvement was really critical as part of that change management piece. Ensuring that our technology and tools worked properly, we had a lot of testing and training that happened to make sure that we were ready to participate and practice in EIM and into the different timelines and schedules and milestones. We did extensive business process work to make sure that we understood how EIM worked. That fed into those training plans to ensure the end users that when it came to go live and post go live, that they were ready and they had the skills necessary to do their jobs. And our backup plans, they had backup plans. Throughout implementation, we experienced different things coming in and out of the project. One of them was our RC West implementation. So in the middle of our EIM implementation, we had to switch reliability coordinators and implement RC. So that was part of the flexibility that we had in our plan, and getting a lot of that work started early to ensure that we had a smooth transition for go live, and we were able to accommodate that implementation. And then for our actual go live plan, we had to kind of redesign everything that we had planned for on-site support and having vendors coming in and have CAISO come in and really prop up a virtual go live. And so being flexible and allowing for that planning and having a lot of collaboration and coordination was critical in the success of our go live, and in making sure that we were communicating our plans to end users. One of the great things about our go live is when we told end users that we were going to support them virtually, they were for it because they were ready, and that's to that change management. Moving on to the next slide. So learning opportunities. So we've been live now for a whole month, and we have had a lot of really awesome learning opportunities. We've been able to practice our normal EIM operations and some contingency operating procedures with our go live, and that is really actually fantastic because during parallel operations, which is your last 2 months of 24/7 operations, we really practice a lot of our procedures and our business processes with our merchant and our BA groups and our plants, doing that testing that Kent talked about. And so when we went live and we had to participate in EIM, we were ready and we were prepared to do those normal and those contingency operations. Software performance and availability, that's really just ensuring that we have that software up and available for 24/7 operations and working through some of those technical solutions post-go live. We also have to ensure that now that we're live, and we heard this from a lot of EIM entities, and so we'll pass the same thing. Once you go live, that's when you really start learning. And so a lot of that refinement of the technical data and understanding that you might not get it all, and that's okay, but you have the ability to refine your processes, refine your data, and make sure that you're getting that accurate data within all of your solutions. Another learning opportunity that we've been experiencing is how do we answer the question? So it's day 2, how well are you doing? How are we doing in that first month? So really understanding the settlements calendar and the schedule, having that reporting ready. We've had a really great learning curve post-go-live to understanding that data and really digging in and looking at our operations now for a month, and then that operational excellence. So we always really strive for operational excellence. But one of the things EIM project we've been able to do is really home in on ensuring that our business processes are working, that our cross-functional teams are communicating and collaborating together, and really making sure that we have those precise tools in order to have accurate operations in EIM. It's been a great month of learning opportunities for us, and we've had a lot of fun trying to delve into the details now that we're live. Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I really appreciate your walking us through your process and go live opportunities. I'm sure the other entities in the queue will have many questions, but we shall hold those until after we hear from Seattle. I'll also note for our participants that following Seattle's presentation and questions, the ISO has a quick announcement about the stakeholder process and another meeting coming up next week, so stay tuned for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Joy from Seattle to walk us through their Go Live presentation.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Pleased to be with you. Hope you can hear me. Pam, can you confirm that you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Excellent.
Great, great. Yeah, so as mentioned, Sarah Davis and Rob Mahoney are taking some personal time off, so I am stepping in today and still finding reasons for appreciation of our wonderful project management team. I'm the Power Management Director at Seattle City Light, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Michael Jang, our Chief GMT Dispatcher, and Mitch Constell, the Power Marketer, and so I'll be leaning on them considerably today for this presentation. But I'll just jump in. So it looks like, next slide. So here's just some high-level information about Seattle City Light. We have a peak load of 1,872 megawatts and peak gen of 2,200. We are, all of our owned generation is hydro. We currently have 7 participating units in the EIM, 17 non-participating, and the participating units are part of a well, some units are from a cascading hydro project on the Skagit River, which is about 100 miles north of Seattle, and the other units are from our boundary project, which is up in the northeastern corner of Washington. Yes, we, like SRP, went live April 1st. It was 100% virtual. It says no issues here, which is true. It was a really successful go live. You know, can't say enough great things about the team. I only wish we could sort of been there in person to celebrate, but as you all know, we weren't able to do that. But it really is testament to good preparation that we were able to pull this off virtually. So, next slide. So here's our timeline, and Kent and Melissa did such a great job for SRP. I think kind of this would be, you know, a lot of repeat to say what they said too. I guess a couple things we could highlight here. We did sign our implementation agreement in December of 2016. We had a long project timeline characterized by a number of drivers. We actually delayed the project in November of 2017 to replace our trading and risk management systems. We put out an RFP for ETRM software, and then our metering upgrades began in summer of 2018. Our ETRM training began Q2 2019, and then ETRM Go Live was last summer of 2019, and then EIM software implementation right on the heels of that. So just amazing sustained energy levels of our teams in all of this. And like I said, just kind of a long project schedule with lots of lots of twists and turns along the way. Next slide. Okay, and yeah, so we tried to organize the project into new groupings we saw that would be as an outcome. Similarly, we had our executive sponsors, but we had dual executive sponsors to manage the really large impact of change. And so we had a merchant participant executive sponsor and a balancing authority executive sponsor. Of course, our project management team and our change management was led by that program and project manager. That would be Sarah Davis and Rob Mahoney. Yeah, so these are the work streams: the merchant participation, data and analytics, and EIM entity. And I won't go into too much more detail, but I'm just going to leave it there in the interest of time. And next slide. And for the next slide, I think we're moving into lessons learned. So this is where I'm gonna really kind of turn to my colleagues, Mitch and Michael, and have them kind of take it from here. Mitch?
Yeah, thanks, Joy. So starting off, we're going to kind of split it up into two sides, lessons learned from the merchant side and then also lessons learned from the VA or dispatch side. So starting off from the merchant side, the two largest hurdles and tasks for SCL to get ready for EIM was the unit scheduling and then the changing hourly timelines. So starting with unit scheduling, that meter data upgrade or that meter upgrade that Joy mentioned, the main reason for doing that was to support a unit model in the EIM. So prior to joining the EIM, SCL's major resources were aggregate hydro plants that were managed on a unit-by-unit basis by the BA side. Since joining, as I mentioned, those aggregate resources were disaggregated in the EIM model and are now scheduled on a per-unit basis by the traders. So that was one of the bigger uplifts, is moving from BA side to handling those unit-by-unit schedules to the merchant traders handling those. So it adds another layer of complexity when going to sell bilaterally. Where are they putting that generation on unit by unit? Because previously it was just moved into an aggregate generation level, and then the BA side would handle it. So a little bit more separation of duties there. And then the second thing was the changing hourly timelines. And that kind of gets broken up into two sections. The first is understanding around-the-clock tasks. The second being the adjusting the bilateral transactions. So with understanding the around-the-clock tasks, merchant operators in the past, as everyone knows, prior to EIM, you have one deadline, and that's the T20 tagging deadline. Upon moving to EIM, though, we now have 4 deadlines, and that's the T75 EIM bidding deadline, T75 test, T55 test, T40 test, and then the T20 tagging deadline if something happens outside of EIM that you need to account for. So having our traders manage that on an hourly basis has been a big uplift because you've gone from 1 point deadline to 4. The second thing is adjusting bilateral transactions. So because there are so many more tests to pass in the EIM, we really took a more cautious approach and implemented more trading deadlines that are further ahead before the hour. So this was done to improve our EIM hourly sufficiency test performance, and we're going to be pulling back those cautious processes as we gain more experience in the market in the coming months. So we'll allow trades to occur closer to T55 or closer to T40 as we progress in the EIM. So I'd say those are the two biggest hurdles for the merchant side.
Thank you, Mitch. This is Michael Chang, the Chief Dispatcher here for the generation transmission on the entity side. And for us on this, train the new normal, a lot of it I would say is just for all future people and people in the past who have probably already connect with this. It's really the communication. I mean, we provided a vast amount of information. It was a whole change of this new norm. Lots, as you guys already all know, tons of acronyms, tons of learning. And with that is as we sent all this information out to the people and to the workers is there was, I would say, the lesson learned is to make sure that they really do understand the things that we have actually told them. I would say one thing, I would give 5 different actual, I would say, feedback in a sense of what it actually meant to them. So it's really like we talk about contingency response, plan outages, following the dots. We're talking about a change of, like, even the Linus security blanket picture. I love that picture. It's the same thing from a dispatcher perspective. You pretty much taken away their foundation, their livelihood. So it's a matter of trying to have them understand moving forward in order to be successful in this, what does it mean to be in real time, and when we say, hey, this is real time, you have a contingency, what will you do, your action that you'll take. What happens is that in the market, it's a whole different perspective. It's not as, when you tell them real time, it means differently to an operator compared to what it means in EIM. And then with all of the EIM, it's on that side with vast amounts of data. We had a whole other interface layer, so that meant a new technology. So a lot of these things was also now then, instead of the precision processes, well, how do we become efficient at it? We created maybe like we're operators, but we're not the most technically savvy amount of people. So it's teaching them about, okay, how do we efficiently, let's say, navigate in actually the browsers. You have 10 to 15 additional screens you have to look at. And those are all the little things that just really comes with over time and just, like I said, with repetition. And then for the CAISO, I would really just say like a lot, they provided vast amount of information. They were very fluid with everything that they provided. It was just a lot of timing. So I would say like they came out several times even before we were in the pandemic. But a lot of information, we couldn't connect the dots. We were so, this was so new to us that it was like a foreign language. And then when we got into parallel, everything started to make sense. A lot of people learned by hands-on, so then they started to then say, oh, the light bulb finally came on. So then those were kind of the things that I would say is to, for anything for in the future is to figure and embrace and have these conversations with the affected work groups and to really to figure out what do they really understand compared to we're just providing it and then that we are saying, hey, we did our job, we gave them all this information, but to take ownership and then we want their feedback, but also is to make sure that that feedback goes 2 ways and then so that the actual communication going from both sides is actually in sync with each other. That's all.
And thanks, Mike. And so moving on to embrace the data, as I'm sure everyone here is aware, there is a massive amount of data that gets thrown on you the second you join EIM, and that's through stage operations, map stage operations, and most importantly, production. So for the past few months before EIM implementation, SEL was focused on operations and a successful go-live. So we successfully passed that stage. I echo what Joy said, it was a major success. We had a smooth transition. And then, so now we're kind of entered the stage of analysis, optimization, and data review stage of turning the mounds of data into actual useful information. And so that's something I think has come as the biggest surprise to us is how much information you actually have at your fingertips. And then what you do with that is kind of up to you. So having a plan on that is going to be super important to your first month, first 2 months, first 3 months of operations. And we're right in the middle of that. So we, because of that massive amount of data, we actually are now working with a vendor, utilizing their software to sort and gather data for optimization improvement opportunities. And then the software is we're planning on using it to kind of provide the foundation of all reporting, both financial, operational, and settlement-driven reports. And right now, we're kind of just scratching the surface of that. So for all other future entities, I would recommend you definitely focus and highlight on what reporting software or tools you will have so that you're ready to hit the ground running once you join EIM.
Thanks, Mitch, and thanks, Michael. So yeah, I'm really glad that they were able to jump on here with me today because these are the boots on the ground, and they can really illustrate kind of everything that's going into having this go so successfully. And hopefully their accounts have really highlighted why change management, as the slide says, change management is the biggest single undertaking of this project. So we can move to the last slide here we have and talk through that. So setting expectations at all levels of the organization, and that means defining, sharing, and reinforcing the why. And in fact, one of the tools that the project management team had were they actually printed up why statements on index cards. These were given out to all of the sponsors who could then, be able to easily reference, this is why we are doing this. It sounds kind of silly, but it's actually, after many, many years of, all of this work, it's nice to have a reference like that where you can always remember and everyone has consistent messaging. But training and helping people process such a big change like EIM was the largest thing that the team did to impact the project. Communication with managers and sponsors to help with resistance was helpful and probably something that could have started sooner. But it really helped with flexibility. And that's the second bullet here. Recognize that the project will evolve, create a solid support structure that can flex with challenges. City Light went through a number of changes throughout this project, which included organizational changes, leadership changes, changes with the teams, and just different decision pathways. So flexibility is key. And another thing is the project team made a conscious decision, well, the steering committee, I should say, made a conscious decision to pivot away from emphasis on financial benefits as the main objective. And they rather decided to highlight focusing on development of staff and organizational capability in market operations and environmental benefits for integrating renewable energy resources to the grid. And so this was really helpful with both internal discussion and for external communications to have that consistency in our messaging. So that's what we have for today. And in the interest of time, I'll just kind of leave it there and hand it back to Pam.
Thank you. I want to make sure that any of our EIM entities in the queue have an opportunity to ask questions, or any of our other stakeholders. So if you could press #2 to get into the queue. Operator, do we have anyone in the question queue?
Yes, we do have a few callers. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Suzanne Cooper with Bonneville. And as being from one of the 9 utilities Pam indicated would be are planning for joining the market in the next few years, I have even a more newfound appreciation for these presentations and the sharing that both of the entities here have done today. So thank you both very much for your presentations and your candor. My question to either or both of you would be, I'm curious about, just being 1 month in, what sorts of metrics you've been using just to kind of gauge your performance, and then whether there are any ongoing activities for continued change management that you find are necessary.
This is Joy. I can actually probably ask Mitch. Mitch, did you want to speak to the metrics part of the question? Do you think you could speak to the metrics? part of the question?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of I'll highlight on two of the things that we're focusing on our just our first month. And again, first month we're all kind of still getting our feet wet in terms of in the implementation. But just the two top things that I would recommend kind of focusing on would be settlements. That's going to be kind of your bottom line. How much money are you making? How much money are you paying out? So focusing on that early is going to be very important. So with focusing on that comes understanding all the charge codes. And that is something that is easier said than done. Those are very complex beasts. So I would say making sure you understand all the charge code aspects and that feed into your reporting on the settlements themselves. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I would recommend you understand all the, I think it's 5 aspects that feed the CAISO EIM benefit calculation, because that is the information that's going to be made public on a quarterly basis. So having software or vendor set up in the prior to going live is going to be super important for making sure that you can, 1, match and understand the CAISO benefit calculation, and 2, get an understanding for what's going to be publicized so that you can actually validate that information. And so those are kind of the 2 important metrics I would recommend focusing on initially going to go live.
Yeah.
Awesome. And this is Melissa.
Great, thank you.
River Project. A few of the things that we're focused on is that precise operations. So ensuring that we are operating according to our plan, that our merchant, our RVA group are collaborating, working together. Throughout the project, we have always maintained that the better quality that our data is, the more precise our operations is, the more we can mitigate maybe some of those settlement impacts. And then I would echo everything Seattle said with learning about that benefits calculation and learning settlements. Settlements is not easy. So digging in and learning right now has been a fun ride this past month.
Thank you.
Other questions from the queue?
Yes, we do have a question. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Cheryl Murray with the Utah Office of Consumer Services. And I'm more familiar with regulated investor-owned utilities. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what kind of analysis and reporting to your governing authorities you will be doing as you join, and to evaluate benefits after you have been part of the EIM for some period of time.
This is Kent Price with SRP.
Oh, go ahead.
Since we're public-owned utility, we don't really, most of our presentations are really focused around our board presentations and to that management side of things. So we're really trying to make sure that they're informed, and our regulatory side will have all the information they need for their discussions. But from the project perspective, we're not as focused on really the issues that your question's referring to.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Okay, looks like the caller didn't have a question. But I have a question in the chat. Can I go ahead and read the question?
Yes.
Okay. So it says, obviously, neither utility had expected that they would have to go live in a virtual environment. Did you contemplate postponing go live? Was virtual operation something that was already in your contingency plan and that you had contemplated and trained for?
So this is Melissa with SRP. I will say that we had not contemplated a virtual go-live or an all-virtual go-live. We were really planning for that on-site, but with the flexibility that we had, we were able to replan all of our go-lives and ensure that we had the proper equipment and the lines working so that we could be successful with our go-live.
I would, oh.
Hi, Joy, do you want me to speak on the entity side of the Go Live?
Please, Michael, please. Yes.
Yes, for Seattle, what we did was we actually did a couple of dry runs. We ran tests. We also reviewed and had communication with CAISO on all the things that could go wrong. Worst case scenarios is kind of like how we would do with N-1 type scenarios. We also spent like a whole weekend doing extreme scenarios simulations, working with our TMO during the parallel to think of all the, like I say, the worst case. We also made sure that all the affected work groups were also on board to understand that there would be, with the virtual, there would be just natural delays with communications and issues that just with the fact that there was nobody on site, that would just naturally come with that. And everything with all those, when everybody understanding and having that consideration, it really made it for it to be a smooth go live night.
And just to add one thing to that, so the whole goal with an EIM go live is to mitigate risk, right? And so this is the one thing that actually helped SCL was being the epicenter. We were the first target, so we had a kind of an idea about 3 or 4 weeks beforehand when those conversations that Mike was talking about actually occurred. So given that information, we had about 3 or 4 week heads up that, hey, if we need to move this to virtual, we can do that. And the other option was if we don't do this in 3 or 4 weeks and make all the necessary preparations, when would we do it? And that was the question we really couldn't answer. If we were to push this out 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, was there any certainty or guarantee that this problem would not still be occurring? And the answer was no. I mean, we're seeing that now with the lockdown now being extended a couple months. So I think looking back, we made the right decision given our information then, and even now with more information, we made the right decision to go virtual and take the certainty of 4 weeks of preparation for that virtual go live versus another 4 or 5 months of hoping that things die down for a different change.
Thank you. And I see we are over time. I do want to give the ISO a few moments to go over their stakeholder announcement. Nikki, is that you?
Actually, Pam, it's Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, Peter. I can hear you.
Oh, great. Well, let me, first of all, say thank you, Pam, and the liaisons, as well as all the presenters that participated in today's event. This was a really insightful and informative forum, that's for darn sure. And we just wanted to take just a couple of seconds here at the end just to announce that the ISO is launching a new stakeholder initiative comments tool to help us provide some more uniform structure and to assist with better search functionality on all of your comments through the stakeholder process. We did put out a market notice on the 1st, but we just wanted to take an opportunity while we have many of you on the line to let you know that this coming Friday, May 8th at 9 a.m., we're going to go through a whole real-time demonstration of the new tool and give stakeholders an opportunity to provide feedback and ask any questions that they may have. This is a stakeholder survey that we conducted last year really identified that stakeholders looked for better opportunities to search through our comments that we receive. So in response to that, we're trying this new online tool and think that it'll be really beneficial for all stakeholders. All of the information is located at CAISO.com. You can locate it on the calendar. It's got everything located there for the stakeholder initiative. But once again, thanks for the time, Pam. This was really a great opportunity, and thanks for giving me the last couple of minutes of time.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm sure that we have more questions for our most recent Go Live participants, and I'm sure they are happy to answer any of your questions offline in more detail. So I think we are over time at this point, and I thank everyone for their participation today. And I'll look forward to our next Regional Issues Forum at the June EIM Governing Body meeting, I think before that. Well, thank you all. I appreciate everyone's attendance today.
Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T.
Thank you, Pam.
That concludes.
Hi, are we on the? Are we on the private speaker line again?
Just a minute. Thank you for using AT&T Event Services. You may now disconnect.